Hello and welcome to the 12th Scouching Report for the 2021 NHL Draft. Today we're going to be looking at Isak Rosén from Leksand, Sweden. And I've been practicing the pronunciation of his name for a little while now, so forgive me if it's still not very good to my Swedish listeners and followers. But Rosén is a player that I think is a little bit tough to put together a case study for because he feels almost a little bit too straightforward. Isak Rosén has just finished a couple of really productive seasons at the junior level in Sweden. At the recent Under-18 tournament in Texas, he led the Swedish team in scoring with 7 goals in 7 games. And when you see a player scoring 28 goals in 50 games over the last 2 seasons at the Under-20 level, and another 7 goals at his Under-18 tournament before being drafted, it could be easy to look at Isak Rosén and say, this guy's just gonna be a goal scorer at some point. And in my tracking work, there is data that indicates that may also be the case. A major metric that I keep an eye on is what I call offensive threat, which is the sum of a player's dangerous pass attempts, individual medium danger shot attempts, and a more heavily weighted individual high danger rate of shot attempts. And during the time when Isak Rosén was a junior level player in Sweden at the Under-20 level, he was by far at that point the highest generator of individual high and medium danger shot attempts that I've tracked over the last 2 seasons, beating Lucas Reichel, who did play in a men's league last year, but he beat him by over 30% after the 3 games of his that I had tracked. But this is where I would caution people to say that, in my opinion, there is a lot more to Isak Rosén's game than just putting the puck in the net. And especially looking at a case like Rosén, where you're looking at potentially a goal scorer down the road, I have a lot of things that could concern me about projecting a player who is predominantly relied upon for goal scoring. And usually that comes from just a lack of diversity of scoring talents. And I mean, just from a fundamental standpoint, to put up the kinds of shooting metrics that he was putting up at the Under-20 level across multiple games and to such a high level, you absolutely need to bring a diverse series of skills to the table. Whether it's skill and aggression to attack the middle of the ice when you do have the puck, intelligence to spot open ice when you don't have the puck to get into more dangerous areas, or having the determination to follow up on an initial missed chance to maybe get a second or even a third dangerous chance from in tight. All of these things need to work together to drive the kinds of results that Rosén showed, and yeah, he kind of shows a lot of those strengths. And he even has a keen eye for tracking the puck as it hits a goalie so he can stay on top of the rebounds and become even more of a dangerous threat than a typical high danger shot attempt. And I imagine that once Isak Rosén does strengthen his frame a little bit more over the next little while, and he's able to resist more pressure from in tight, I think he not only will be a shooting threat for a goal scorer, but also a tipping and rebound threat in front at higher levels, which did seem to go away once he left the J20 level. And with players like Rosén, the biggest question that I have is what happens when pace gets ratcheted up on you? You can't play at the junior level forever, and at some point you're gonna have to play professional competition, especially if you want to be an NHL prospect. And you can look at Isak Rosén's SHL data, be it just his point production or the data that's there on Pick 224, and easily write him off as just a guy who wasn't much of a needle mover in the Swedish Hockey League this year. Rosén just wasn't playing a whole lot of minutes. I really tried to pick out individual games where there was a big enough sample of Rosén where I was comfortable with my findings, and even then it got a little bit spotty here and there. But this is one thing with Rosén that really surprised me when I saw him hit the SHL. His ability to cover ice, chip and chase pucks, fetch pucks on retrievals, especially in the offensive zone, and drive good overall results when you look at his ability to drive dangerous offense, his ability to drive transitions offensively with control, and make plays off the boards. And honestly, at times with Rosén in the SHL, there were flashes of what I would honestly call dominance. It only happened twice or maybe 3 times in the games that I saw outside of the junior level, but it showed up, and Rosén certainly did not look out of place in the SHL. So this touches on something with Isak Rosén that I really didn't expect when I started tracking him. This is not just a guy where you're shipping him the puck and he's shooting it from everywhere in the offensive zone as a scoring threat. This is a player that is going out, playing the game, driving two-way results, and trying to drive offense and then rewarding himself with that shot attempt at the end of that chain of events. And the other thing to take home, which I think is even more important, is if you look at Rosén and take away him as a scoring threat, which kind of seemed to happen in the SHL, he more than made up for it when it came to driving play and pushing pucks into dangerous areas from the boards. So he seems to be able to recognize when he might be a little bit outmatched and needs to rely on maybe some line mates to drive play for him a little bit here and there, and he was much more focused on making plays rather than finishing them in the men's league this season from my tracking experience. And as I mentioned earlier, it was really hard to find a good sample, and I usually stay away from tracking international games, but this year I'm going to have to relax that rule a little bit because Isak Rosén's SHL workload dwindled down to single digits or even single digit numbers of shifts. So the last game I tracked was Sweden's under-18 game against the Finns in the bronze medal game that they won 8-0, but it was a bronze medal game nonetheless, so it mattered. So you might look at Isak Rosén and say, well, he had 7 goals and 2 assists at the under-18, and so he's a shooting threat. He just shot from everywhere. And part of that is true, but it surprised me to see that in that bronze medal game, he registered 5 dangerous pass attempts. And a fascinating statistical quirk for Isak Rosén from going from the J20 level in Sweden to the SHL level is that while Rosén put up 3 dangerous shot attempts in the 3 SHL games that I tracked, which is good for a rate of 6.2 dangerous shot attempts per 60 minutes, which means he really wasn't playing all that much, his rate of dangerous passes went from 5.6 in the junior level to over 12 in the senior level in the SHL. And in my opinion, he showed a much more diverse version of his game at the SHL level rather than the J20 level. He was moving pucks up the ice more often, he was trying to make plays off the boards more often, he was much more selfless with the puck in the offensive zone, utilizing line mates much more effectively, and he seemed to be much more active on defensive engagement through the neutral zone. And all of those things were things that I was a little bit concerned about not seeing at the junior level, so it is an interesting clue about how Rosén's brain seems to adapt to the different levels that he played at this year. And this touches on what I would call a little bit of a question mark with Isak Rosén, but it's not necessarily a good or bad thing. In the J20, I could not help but think that Rosén was coming off as a little bit selfish a lot of the time, holding on to pucks, skating for laps around the perimeter, surveying the offense constantly over and over and over again, and then ending up not being able to do very much with the puck at the end of the day. He was one of the lowest rates of pass attempts that I have ever tracked at around 46 in the junior level in Sweden, and he only had 4 shot assists in those 3 games, and considering how often he was getting dangerous shot attempts on his own, you could argue that maybe he was just taking over shifts on his own because he could, but I do want to see players utilizing line mates and at least trying to pass pucks around and deceive defenders and try to move goalies around in the net before taking a shot. But once his game left the J20 and he was pushed in the SHL a little bit with the pace, things started to change for the better. But if he does regress back to that style of player over the next little while, it could be a bit of an issue. But I'm not particularly concerned considering the majority of this season was outside of the J20 level and his game did seem to improve and at least change as time went on this year. On the other end of the puck, Isak Rosén is a bit of a question mark defensively. He can be up and down here and there, but he certainly got much better as he left the J20 and pace was pushed against him in the SHL. This is a player that you can absolutely tell tries defensively and still leans a little more offensively, but you can still see that he is trying. With a defensive controlled zone transition percentage of 50%, and being involved in 18% of his team's defensive zone transitions, that is a pretty clear data-based indication that this is a forward that is pretty highly involved in defensive transitions on the whole, but not extremely effective, but I would say he's competent enough. But to me, Isak Rosén came away at times just a little bit too passive and a little bit too soft on his feet and soft with his stick checks to be what I would consider an effective two-way winger, but I am pleased to see that he was a player that was involved in this area of the game. In the SHL, his lack of strength was a lot more apparent when it came to engaging in board battles. He might go in with a really soft stick check and not apply any physical imposition whatsoever, and that is something that I think will need to be tweaked a little bit as time goes on, but it's not the end of the world to me. But I also really want to point out that Rosén is a smart positional defender. He knows how to identify open men in the defensive zone, cover them with his stick, get in their zone of influence and just try to get into their face a little bit in some kind of way, even if he's not going to bulldoze them to the ice and throw them halfway across the defensive zone. So I don't really see any cause for concern defensively when it comes to putting Isak Rosén out against pretty much any competition level, but it would be nice to see a little bit more pressure application out of Rosén over time, and I feel like an overall lack of that in his game on a shift-by-shift basis might limit his effectivity in the NHL as an impact player at both ends. Because I watch a lot of NHL hockey, and you don't really cause a whole lot of turnovers by skating into a rush offense's rushing lane and then skating out of it without doing very much. And that's something that I saw with Rosén a little bit, and that's something that I see with a lot of young forwards. But I do also want to stress that this is a player that leans offensively, but is going to be a perfectly competent defensive player most of the time, I think. So the best part of Isak Rosén's game to me is pretty straightforward. And really it's just the diversity with which he's able to drive shot attempts in dangerous areas for himself. It was most clearly apparent at the junior level, but it does stand to reason that that is something that should carry with him as he continues to develop. Whether it's tipping in open ice in the middle of the ice in the offensive zone, shots from the dangerous areas, using his agility and skill to cut inside and attack the middle of the ice himself, or just finding open space to make himself a quick one-time threat. He does it all, and there is a reason why he was generating so many dangerous shot attempts in the offensive direction with him on the ice, especially outside of the SHL. So if anyone is telling you that Isak Rosén is just a one-trick pony or a trigger man who relies on other players to do a lot of the dirty work for him, frankly, I would just disagree. He's got pace, he's got some speed, he's got some skill, he can be tenacious with the puck, willing to attack the middle of the ice, and without it, he shows intelligence to identify open space and identify how to get himself square to the puck carrier, and can easily put himself in very favorable, what I would call greasy goal situations. But he attacks the middle of the ice, he attacks it with pace, and he does it often, and I think that that is universally projectable. The good part is that Isak Rosén has a really good sense of, again, this practical skill that I talk about in a lot of videos. Isak Rosén doesn't have the quickest hands or doesn't have the best ability to pull pucks everywhere, but he does know how to weave through traffic, get through opponents, and just push play offensively in a good way. He generated offensive transitions in a controlled way at a very, very high rate that I didn't expect for a player like Rosén. There was only one game I tracked where he was below a 45% offensive controlled zone transition percentage, and every single other game was over 70%. And considering 3 of the 7 games I tracked were in the SHL, his overall performance, especially in this specific area of the game, indicates that this isn't just a trigger man who can't do anything except shoot the puck in the offensive zone. He often squares up to breakout defenders ready to accept breakout passes, and he uses nice smooth crossovers that maybe don't generate a tremendous amount of speed, but it does create enough deception with his feet that can really confuse defenders with which rushing lanes he's going to take, and with this practical skill he can just weave through traffic, a single layer here, maybe 2 layers there, and I hope this is something that continues to improve in his game as time goes on. The not so good part is really straightforward with Rosén. I think the biggest thing for him is just getting stronger on his feet. He will need to work on resisting pressure with the puck, imposing himself to cause more turnovers in the defensive end, and being more confident and more willing to get sticks and his body in the way of rush lanes to try to clog up the neutral zone a little bit better. The good thing with Rosén in this area though is that the instinct to get involved defensively is there. He is not a slouch, he doesn't take the foot off the gas pedal defensively, he gets involved. It's just that his effectiveness is not necessarily very high, and it was being tested very significantly in the SHL, so you have to give him a little bit of leeway here, and his defensive involvement and effectiveness did take a bit of a jump with the higher pace of the SHL in my opinion, but it certainly wouldn't hurt, especially to help enable his offensive tools a little bit more, to be more resilient with the puck on his stick, be able to fend guys off, not just with skill, but even that strength and maybe a little bit more explosiveness on his feet, which would come from a bit more strength, just to allow him to play that junior level game that I saw a little bit more often in the men's league level, because if he can bridge that gap, there could be a heck of a dynamic scoring winger here one day. So off the top, I said that this case study was a little bit tough because it was a little bit too straightforward. But it was also tough because it was straightforward in a way that I didn't really expect. And even coming out of watching a couple of games with the Leksand junior team, I really thought that Isak Rosén was going to really struggle in the SHL based on what I had seen. But his game completely morphed into something a lot more projectable and useful in my opinion. This is a diverse and well-rounded and skilled offensive winger with great shooting talent. He may not have the Alexander Holtz wrist shot that we saw last year that was a threat from literally anywhere, but he brings a diverse ability to drive offensive chances from the puck on his stick. And I don't believe that Isak Rosén is likely to be a real, serious, game-breaking 5-on-5 offensive threat player, but I certainly believe that all the talent is there for Rosén to be a good, complementary piece with more talented line mates, especially on defense and center playing with him, to get him pucks in favorable situations and just take a little bit off of his plate from time to time. And then you could put him out on the power play as a finishing threat because of that shooting threat that he brings. He chips in defensively so that he's not necessarily a liability, and even if he's not the most effective defensive player, the offensive pros heavily outweigh the limited cons in that area to me. And if anything, it makes his offensive game more appealing to me because it means that I don't necessarily have to worry so much about him when he doesn't have the puck. And while he was arguably the best player on the Swedish junior team at the under-18s this year, it did feel like his game was a little bit off. He seemed to lack the pace and the creativity that I saw in the junior level, the speed and tenacity at the SHL level that I saw, and he just seemed to be underperforming his talent level at times, not even just in that bronze medal game I tracked, but throughout the whole tournament. But considering he hadn't played a game in a month, hadn't played more than 10 minutes in a game since Boxing Day 2020, and the Swedish under-18 team was largely underwhelming, in a word, I suppose some more uncharacteristic moments of his could be a little bit forgiven, and I will definitely rest on the previous 6 games that I tracked, but it was also very interesting to see Isak Rosén basically be all kinds of different types of players based on the level in which he was playing. But coming out of the tracking experience with Isak Rosén, I know what I have seen, and when he's playing really, really well, there is a heck of a hockey player there. And I do think he's undervalued if his average rank somewhere in the 20s is what turns out to be what happens on draft day. He's capable of being a selfless, play-driving winger when he's faced with pressure at high pace, but he can also put the possession on his back and drive offense on his own, even at the SHL level. And yes, outside the J20 in my data, his shooting data did kind of evaporate, but if he improves his strength, continues to refine his skill under high pressure and navigating pressure in the offensive zone, and gets more confident to attack more dangerous areas with the puck on his stick or without it, it absolutely should raise his SHL scoring threat. But if that kind of style of play doesn't come enough of a ways to make it work as a goal scorer for Rosén down the road, he at least showed the initiative to try to get pucks into the middle of the ice and much more of a playmaker's instinct to try to get pucks in front of the net. And that tendency to adapt his style of play based on the level in which he's playing at seems to indicate to me that this is a guy who's aware of his limitations and aware of what he's able to do, and I don't really see Rosén as predominantly the sort of selfish, me first, shoot only player that I saw at the J20 level over a large sample at higher levels. So when looking back at Isak Rosén in a few years, I can easily see a world where he's just an overall scoring threat, whether it's with the puck, shooting it himself, or setting up plays for line mates, because I saw both versions of that on display over the course of this season. He brings pace, he adjusts to his playing level very well and continues to be an effective player regardless of where he's playing. He almost universally pushed offensive transitions with effectiveness, control, and high volume. He participates defensively with his positioning and his stick checking. And in the junior level, he was by far the strongest shooting threat in the purest form that I have ever tracked. And if this is a player that a contending team right now can add as maybe a complementary offensive piece in a couple of years once he develops in Sweden a little more, or if he somehow slips out of the first round or is picked with a rebuilding team's second or even third first round pick, I really think that the floor with Rosén is relatively high as an NHL player of some kind, and I'm not really sure what his ceiling could be, but I do think that there is an avenue where he could become a really, really good player to come out of this NHL draft, even if you're not noticing him every single time he steps on the ice. So that's all for this Scouching Report. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, you can click all the buttons you see below me so you never miss another one. If you really liked it, you could subscribe on Patreon or here on YouTube by clicking join below. You'll get access to a Discord server, early access to videos, exclusive written reports, as well as data sheets for hundreds of drafted and undrafted NHL prospects, and plenty of other goodies you can check out. Or you can pick up some merchandise from the Scouchwear shop, where 50% of profits go to the Women's Sports Foundation. So that's all, and we'll see you in the next one.